In the latest episode of Ferrari Fuck-Ups, Ferrari completely destroyed their number one driver Charles Leclerc's Grand Prix, resulting in Leclerc not finishing on the podium and costing him what would have been a very good race victory despite damage to his car. And it was, despite Carlos Sainz winning for the team, a pretty comical race, as it should have been quite comfortably a 1-2 finish for the team. But just how did they get it wrong this time? Well, let's get into it. So first up, we'll get into how they got into a 1-2 position after Max Verstappen, after passing Carlos Sainz when Sainz made a mistake towards the Chapel corner. Verstappen, got past Sainz. Then Max, I think a couple laps later, had a puncture after running over debris from the AlphaTauris that collided, of course, at turn 3. That then put Ferrari in a position where they were first and second. But Charles Leclerc was much quicker than Carlos Sainz. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And Max Verstappen, when he pitted on lap 12, Charles Leclerc, really, up until Carlos Sainz's pit stop, was all over the back of Sainz and was being held up by about half a second per lap and was losing quite a bit of time, to the point where Lewis Hamilton, now in third, was starting to gain a lot of time on the two Ferraris ahead. And you can see with this data that once Carlos Sainz pitted on lap 20, that Leclerc straight away was going consistently a lot quicker than he was before, despite his tyres, continuing to degrade, and then obviously pitted on lap 25. But once Charles Leclerc eventually made his pit stop, he was once again stuck behind Carlos Sainz for another few laps, and then eventually and finally he was allowed through by Carlos Sainz, and Ferrari finally got Leclerc ahead of Sainz, something that should have happened about 15 laps before. And once he was allowed through, his pace was much, much better than it was previously. And even when Lewis Hamilton, who pitted a lot later after Charles Leclerc had made that stop and got up to speed, Hamilton was quicker, but not that much quicker than Leclerc, despite being on quite a bit more fresher tyres than Leclerc. So that was clear evidence that Charles Leclerc had a lot of speed, but Ferrari, for some unknown reason, didn't want to use it. But at this point, it was a 1-2 for the team, and it was still looking pretty likely they were going to win the 2022 British Grand Prix. But then the safety car came out because Esteban Ocon's car was parked on the old pit straight heading into Copse Corner. This meant that it was almost certain that plenty of cars, if not every car remaining in the field, was going to come into the pits for a fresh set of tyres, and most likely the soft compound tyre. Now, when the safety car was officially announced, Charles Leclerc was in the final corner before the pit entry. So there was a few seconds before that pit entry came up for Leclerc for a decision to be made as to what they were going to do with Charles Leclerc. And the decision was made to keep him out, as they didn't think it was really possible to stack both cars.
You cannot be serious!
Yes, that's right. Matteo Binotto, after the Grand Prix, said that they thought a double pit stop was impossible, so they actually, from their view, had to make a choice between pitting Leclerc or Sainz. Even though they were kind of close on track, they could have still pitted both cars, stacked them in the pits, and still probably had got both cars on the podium. Especially if Carlos Sainz did what most drivers who are the second driver for that team on track do, which is back up the cars behind to give the team enough space so both cars can pit and it be, the quickest pit stop possible. And would have had still, even if Carlos Sainz having to wait behind Leclerc was at a position by a couple positions, they still would have had a great chance at getting a 1-2 finish, because Ferrari's pace, because Verstappen was out of action, was still pretty good. But even if you are going to make the decision as to who out of your two drivers is going to pit for new soft tyres, why would you go with Sainz when, if you still believe that Leclerc can win the Drivers' Championship, surely you would pit Charles Leclerc? And also, remember this, guys, if Ferrari had forced Leclerc to move ahead of Sainz way earlier than they did, then when that safety car came, Leclerc already would have been much further up the road compared to Carlos Sainz, meaning they would have been able to stack their cars, so they still screwed themselves over. So they left Charles Leclerc out on track, and Carlos Sainz came into the pits, put on soft tyres, and obviously that is what won Carlos Sainz the Grand Prix, and Charles Leclerc did the best he could, but ended up finishing in 4th place. Yes, they won the Grand Prix, but ultimately did not get the best result they should have got, and what they should have got was a 1-2 finish. And that now means for the 5th Grand Prix in a row, Charles Leclerc has not finished on the podium and has only had 1 podium in the last 7 races. If you told anyone after the Australian Grand Prix where Leclerc absolutely dominated that weekend that that would happen, everybody would have laughed at you, even though we know what Ferrari are like. And just when I thought at Monaco we saw peak Ferrari, they made sure to go even higher than they did in Monte Carlo, with an absolutely brain-dead Grand Prix from them on strategy. At this point though, what more is there to say? This is what Ferrari are, and they are always going to be this way. No matter how good their drivers are, no matter how quick the car is, they will always make their job way harder than it really should be. Which is why, still, the championship isn't really possible, because they continue to trip over themselves. I wonder what they have in store for us at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. It should be good from them. But guys, let me know in the comments section down below, what did you think of what Ferrari did in yesterday's 2022 British Grand Prix? And until next time guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.